Have you ever wondered why politicians seem to ignore what the public wants? It's a frustrating puzzle. In fact, a recent study found that 70% of Americans believe their elected officials don't listen to them. Yet, despite this disconnect, many politicians keep getting re-elected. Did you know that around 95% of House incumbents won their races in the last election? That's an astonishing number, especially when you consider how many people feel their voices go unheard. It's almost as if politicians have cracked a secret code to stay in power. In this video, we'll dive into the reasons behind this political paradox. We'll explore how money influences decisions, why voters forget broken promises, and how media narratives shape public perception. By the end, you'll understand why politicians often act against public opinion and still manage to win our votes. Get ready to uncover the hidden strategies that keep politicians in power, regardless of what the people really want. Chapter 1: The Puppet Master Illusion. Who really pulls the strings? We like to think that politicians are accountable to the people, but that's not always the case. There are often bigger forces at play, forces we don't see. Special interest groups, lobbyists, and corporations have a huge influence on what gets done in Washington. In 2020 alone, US lobbyists spent over $3.5 billion influencing politicians and their policies. Many politicians rely on these groups for campaign funding. For example, in the 2022 midterm elections, it was reported that 76% of political donations came from large donors or political action committees, PACs, not regular citizens. So, while we vote, those with deep pockets are pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's no surprise then that politicians sometimes act in ways that seem out of sync with public opinion. Their priorities can shift towards the interests of their donors rather than the people they represent. Former President Jimmy Carter once said, "America does not have a functioning democracy right now." He was pointing to the fact that money and corporate influence shape more policies than voters do. What does this mean for you? It means that when politicians ignore your opinions, it's often because they're being guided by financial backers, not the electorate. The invisible hand of lobbyists might just be more powerful than the visible hand of public opinion. If you're enjoying this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss our deep dives into the world of politics. Chapter 2: Voter Amnesia. The psychology of why we forget broken promises. It's easy to get frustrated when politicians break promises, but it happens over and over again. So, why do we keep electing them? Part of the answer lies in what psychologists call voter amnesia. Simply put, we forget. Studies show that most voters can only remember a politician's promises for about 6 months after an election. After that, other news or events take over, and old promises fade from memory. In one study, only 37% of voters could recall specific campaign promises a year later. Politicians are experts in taking advantage of this. They understand the short news cycle and use it to their advantage. They make big promises early, knowing that by the time the next election rolls around, many people won't hold them accountable for what they didn't achieve. It's a clever strategy. Another key tool politicians use is strategic communication. They bombard us with positive messaging in the lead-up to elections. This tactic is called agenda setting. By controlling the conversation, they can shape what we think is important. If voters are more focused on the promises they're making now rather than the ones they broke in the past, politicians can sail through elections almost unscathed. In short, our attention spans and memories are limited. Politicians know this and use it to their benefit, counting on the fact that most of us won't remember everything they failed to do. Chapter 3: Electoral Game of Chess. Mastering the system over the people. Elections should be simple, right? The candidate with the most votes wins. But in reality, politics is more like a complex game of chess, and the pieces aren't always in the voters' favor. Politicians know how to master the system, and they often play to win by bending the rules. Take gerrymandering, for example. It's a tactic where political districts are drawn in ways that favor one party. This means politicians can win elections even if they aren't that popular with voters. In 2021, 95% of House incumbents were re-elected, partly due to gerrymandered districts. So even if public opinion swings against them, they can still keep their seats. Another strategy is how they manipulate voter turnout. Research shows that in the 2020 US presidential election, nearly 33% of eligible voters didn't vote at all. Politicians often focus on their core supporters, knowing that many people won't show up to vote, allowing them to cater to a smaller, more dedicated base rather than worrying about the broader public. Moreover, the electoral system itself can sometimes favor one party over the other, even if public opinion suggests otherwise. In the 2016 US election, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, but Donald Trump won the presidency due to the Electoral College system. This isn't a glitch in the system, it's a feature that politicians understand well and use to their advantage. So while you might think your vote doesn't matter, it's more that the system itself can work against the public's wishes. Politicians master the rules, focusing on strategies that ensure they win, whether or not they align with what the people actually want. Chapter 4: The Illusion of Choice. How policies remain the same regardless of who you vote for. Have you ever noticed that no matter who wins the election, certain policies never seem to change? That's not by accident. There's a built-in inertia in politics, some things just don't move. Politicians might promise bold changes, but once in office, they tend to maintain the status quo. One example of this is US military spending. Whether a Democrat or Republican is in power, the defense budget rarely goes down. In fact, in 2022, the US military budget reached over $800 billion, an increase regardless of who held the presidency. It's a clear sign that some policies are bigger than any one party. The reason behind this is simple: deeply entrenched interests. Some policies benefit powerful groups, like the defense industry or large corporations, so they remain untouched. It's why both parties often support corporate tax cuts or resist major reforms in industries like healthcare and energy. Thomas Ferguson's investment theory of party competition explains that politicians often cater to what he calls the investment blocs, the big financial backers who fund campaigns. These blocs invest in both parties, ensuring that core policies don't shift dramatically no matter who wins. Voters are given the illusion of choice, but the reality is more complex. Policies that protect corporate interests or national security are often locked in place by a network of lobbyists, donors, and powerful bureaucrats. So, while campaign promises might sound different, the results can feel eerily similar. Politicians know this, and it's part of how they stay in power. They make surface-level changes while leaving the core of the system untouched. Chapter 5: The Media Muzzle. How news outlets shape public perception to protect politicians. The media plays a huge role in politics, but it's not always about holding politicians accountable. In many cases, media outlets can actually protect politicians by controlling the narrative. This is especially true when large media companies have political or financial ties to those in power. A 2020 study by the Pew Research Center found that 82% of Americans believe the media has a significant influence on public opinion. Politicians are aware of this and work closely with certain media outlets to manage their image. This control is often subtle. Rather than spinning outright lies, media can simply choose what stories to highlight and what to ignore. Take the example of political scandals. In recent years, we've seen multiple politicians embroiled in controversy, yet they manage to remain in office. Media outlets might cover these scandals briefly, but they quickly shift focus to other stories. When coverage dies down, so does public outrage. Politicians use this tactic as a form of damage control. By ensuring that their scandals are underreported or quickly forgotten, they can survive politically even when they should be facing serious consequences. The book Manufacturing Consent by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky highlights this media strategy, showing how news is filtered in ways that favor those in power. This doesn't mean the media is always complicit, but it does mean that politicians understand how to navigate bad press. They can survive a storm by staying quiet, avoiding interviews, and waiting for the next big news cycle to take over. In the end, public opinion is shaped by what we see on the news, and politicians have learned how to use that to their advantage. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're committed to unpacking the complexities of politics and keeping you informed. Join our community for more enlightening discussions.